Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jaden and I'm going to tell you about the books I read in June. I read 15 books. So the first book I read was Fate Be Changed. I rated this one 4 stars. I've read a bunch of the Twisted Tale books before and I really liked this one. I liked learning more about Eleanor and Fergus's backstory and how they fell in love originally before Merida messed it all up. But all the different situations and consequences that Merida went through in this book. It just felt like it was a lot happening all at once. It was too much and too many. Like, you would think, oh, she's got this situation under control. JK, here's another problem. And then she would just get consequences over and over for these things she did. And for me, it felt too much and too many all at the same time. And I felt so bad for her because she didn't mean to do this and all these consequences were happening to her. Also, the ending seemed a little too wrapped up nicely for me. But overall, I really liked this book. Most of the time when I read the Twisted Tale books, I really enjoy them, and I really enjoyed this one. The next book I read was Bright Young Woman. I rated this one 3.5 stars. It had a good premise, and I liked the alternating chapters between past and future, Pamela and Ruth. It was a little confusing at times, especially at the end for Ruth. Revelations about certain people seemed to come out of nowhere for me, and there was one reveal I liked that started in the middle and then got majorly revealed at the end. It was a decent read. And it had been on my TBR for a while, and I finally found it in my library. So overall, it was a pretty okay book. After that, I read 0 Days. This one I rated 4 stars. This was also on my TBR list. The first few pages of the book sucked me in, and I really enjoyed the main character, Jack, and the story of how she goes to clear her name for her husband's murder. I liked all the good Samaritans that helped Jack along her way, who didn't know her story and that she was running away from being blamed for killing her husband, and all these people didn't know, and they helped her along the way for her to try to clear her name. I really enjoyed the book, and I didn't want to stop reading it. I wish that we had seen more of Jack before he died. Yes, we got more about him after he died, but I would have liked to see more of his personality before he died and not just hearing about it afterwards. But I did like what we got overall. I was a little confused about the software stuff they talked about. I'm not very into all that software and technology, so when they talked about that stuff, it was confusing for me a little bit. And I didn't like how the book ended for Jack, and I wished that the killers got more consequences for their actions instead of what they got. Next, after that, I read The Only One Left. This one I rated 4.5 stars. I finished this book in a little more than a day because it sucked me in that fast. Because it sucked me in. It was a really awesome story and I really liked the characters. I loved reading the typed out letters more than the actual plot of the story. I just wanted to read more of those letters. The twist at the end for the killer felt out of nowhere for me, and the last chapter felt a little rushed for me and a little confusing, especially with the last sentence overall. But I loved the book and I would read this again. I think I've read some of his books before, or one of his books, and I don't remember what I felt about it, but I really liked this one. After that, I got back into Greek mythology and I read Elektra. This one I rated 5 stars. I love Greek mythology. If you've seen my past videos, I'm pretty sure I've read a Greek mythology book basically every month and didn't stop in June. And this was an awesome book. I loved all the characters and I loved reading their stories. I loved the different perspectives between what was going on the Trojan side and on the Greek side through Cassandra, Clemestra, and Elektra's perspectives. I wish there was more Cassandra because Cassandra was my favorite character in this book. I would read this book again because I really enjoyed it. It was so much fun. After that one, I read another Greek mythology book. I read Atalanta. That one I rated 4.5 stars. I had never heard of Atalanta before, reading this book, but I really loved reading about her. Artemis is also mentioned in this book, and she is one of my favorite Greek goddesses, so I loved learning more about her in this iteration of it. The names that were used, well, the names in general in the book sometimes confused me because there were so many all at one time, and it was hard to keep track of sometimes. I liked how the ending was different than how I thought it was going to be, and I liked how Atalanta's story ended. I felt it was really good for her character, and it definitely transformed how I see her, how she sees herself, and how everybody else sees her as well. After that, I got more into comic books, so I read about like 6 or 7 comic books this month. So the first one I started with was Black Widow and Hawkeye, and I read one of the variant covers. I rated this one 5 stars. It's the first book in a series, and I'm sucked in. I want to read more about the series. I need to know why Hawkeye did what he did, and I love the idea of Natasha being attached to the symbiote, because she is in this book, and I'm like, how did this happen? I want to know more. So it really intrigued me. The next comic was Dark Crisis issue 1. This one I rated 4 stars. Intriguing premise, and I liked the idea of a new Justice League because the people there don't know what happened to the old one, and the only survivor is Black Adam. So there's distrust about Black Adam because nobody knows if he's telling the truth or not. Like I said, I liked the distrust, I liked the goriness of it, and the ending confused me of this book, and I'm not really interested in learning more, like reading more of the series, but the first book was very good. It was very well written. The next comic was then Xmen Red Issue 1. That one I rated 3 stars. It was the first issue, and I was already confused about what the heck was going on, and I still don't. There were good characters. There was a good character and good fight scene in it that I liked, but that was about it, and I don't really want to read more. The next comic after that was The Defenders issue 3. So when I went to the comic book store, I saw this book, and it looked like it was the first issue. Turns out it was the 3rd issue, and so I have no idea what was going on before I read this comic. And even though it is just the 3rd issue, I wasn't as confused as you would think, since I hadn't read the first 2 issues. I was pretty okay. Like, yeah, there was some confusion, but I wasn't, like, majorly confused. I was confused with characters and plot, which makes sense. I started in the middle of a series, but it was still pretty good. I was intrigued by the ending, and it makes me want to read more. So if I were to read the first 2 comics and then read the issues afterwards, I don't think I would be as confused as I was. And I was already intrigued by issue 3, so issues 1 and 2 and the one after that should be good too, right? The next comic was then Jurassic League issue 1. I rated that one 5 stars. It was a really cute idea, and the first issue was a good introduction to the premise. It was fun to read, and I would love to read more of the series. I believe it's a limited series, only 6 issues, so I would definitely see myself reading the other 5 issues. The next comic was World of Krypton issue 1. I read another variant cover. I rated this one 2 stars. I hated the illustration style in this comic. I could not focus on the plot and the dialogue because the illustrations were just that bad for me, and I could not focus. I could not focus on anything else. I was confused about characters because the drawing style just took me out so much. I couldn't tell you what it was about because it was just that bad. So that's why I rated this 2 stars, because I can't tell you anything about the plot. I know it happens on Krypton, and I think Zod is mentioned, and something bad happens, and I think Superman and Supergirl's parents are there. That's about it, because I can't tell you anything else. The last comic I read this month was Robin and Spoiler Special issue 1. That one I rated 3 stars. The story was good. okay. I liked learning more about Tim Drake and Stephanie Brown. The plots, because I believe there were 2 plots going on in this book, were confusing at times, and the illustrations were okay. And then the penultimate book I read this month was The Dare. I was a little disappointed in this book because I had read stuff by Natasha Preston before, and her books are really good. They really end on like cliffhangers and endings that just leave you like, what do I do now? Because they just shock you that much. I didn't get that from this book. There were too many characters to keep track of for me, and they all blended together. This book is basically I Know What You Did Last Summer. Adds some twists, but other than that, it's I Know What You Did Last Summer. And the ending was abrupt and confused. Like, yeah, her endings are usually abrupt, but for me, this one was like more abrupt, and it was very confusing. And basically, this book was I Know What You Did Last Summer. After that, I just kind of tuned out. After I like found out what the plot was and I read the book, I'm like, yeah, I don't care anymore, because it's basically I Know What You Did Last Summer. And then the last book I read in June was The 3 Lives of Willa Stannard. I started this book before I went on a trip, and I was hardly able to read this book during my trip, and so it was only after my trip that I was able to finish this book, and so that's probably why I only rated it 3 stars, because I was only able to read bits of it throughout my trip, and so I might have missed stuff. I read maybe like a couple chapters a day instead of like multiple chapters because I can read that fast. It was just okay. Like, if I was able to read this like I normally do, it probably would have been higher, but from right now, it's just meh. It had short chapters, which I like. I really like short chapters in a book, and I liked following the main character Sawyer's journey of trying to figure out why her sister committed suicide. Even though she doesn't think it's a suicide, she thinks it's a murder, with what the story her sister was writing. Everything got revealed for me in like the last 30 pages, which was okay. But to me, it felt like stuff was sort of out of nowhere. But also, like, I had read chapters spaced out, like a couple chapters or a chapter a day, spaced out over more than a week. So I was probably more confused more than anything. So yeah, the book was just okay. Overall, it was an okay experience. So those are the 15 books I read in June. If you have any recommendations for July, let me know down below. Or if you just have any recommendations in general, I would love to check those out. Also, if you have any questions, put them down below. Alright, I'll see you next month. Bye!